and to understand also the synergy that I'm talking about between art, politics, history, literature, culture, music. I mean, if you look at it, society, the fabric of society, which part of it is not permeated by art? It's all joined. I grew up in a family which was a family of academics, and my father wanted to be an artist. And he met Hussain Saab, MF Hussain, when he was a student in Aligarh. And he left our home, my grandfather's home, and followed Hussain Saab to Delhi, where he lived with him and studied under him. Hussain Saab was his mentor, his patron. And then my father had some beautiful shows, 2 solo shows. Sadly, he just didn't think that that was going to give him a living that he could make, or give him a life. I think those times were very different, and maybe the struggle was much harder. So sadly, he let that go. I wasn't even aware of this as a child. You don't know any of this, right? But I grew up seeing art in our home, and I grew up seeing some of my father's work, but I also grew up seeing things that they could afford. For example, prints of great artwork from Europe, some of the great Flemish Dutch masters. Every time that my parents traveled, or my father traveled especially, he came back with these engrais, exquisite work steeped in history. But the other way that my father introduced me to art was through, I don't know if you remember, but there used to be these encyclopedias, and not only Britannica, but these encyclopedias which would take a particular period and a particular subject, and there would be pictures in them. And one of the pictures that I remember vividly, and which is why he's one of my favorites even today, is Caravaggio. And I remember looking at the chiaroscuro, the whole shadow and light play that Caravaggio worked with so beautifully and was one of the proponents of. And then I would just not stop reading about it. So books were also a way for me in my childhood to travel to places I couldn't physically travel to look at art, to look at literature, and to understand also the synergy that I'm talking about between art, politics, history, literature, culture, music. I mean, if you look at it, society, the fabric of society, which part of it is not permeated by art? It's all joined. Classics that sort of seep into you and expose you to the importance of art, culture, history, cinema, theater, music, and why is it so important? I have been just very blessed to have grown up with it. My relationship with my clients is the same. I tell their stories. I'm extremely clear about it. I am not telling my story. It's homes, which is what we really love doing and we do, are extremely private, intimate, personal spaces. I don't want to put a stamp of a style or a person, which is anyone but the client. And so for me, everything begins with the client. The context is the client, the story is the client. I'm the storyteller, and I have to have the tools, the aesthetic tools necessary to write their story. It has to reflect them. Understanding or reaction to a piece is intensely mine, and I think that's the beauty of art, how it speaks to everyone. But I think more than this, art is not only a visual expression, art is not only something as simplistic as that. Art is an expression of our times, of our history, of the history of mankind. I'm going to talk about the cave paintings. That's where we started. Man started drawing on the caves as far as back as history can record to express what they felt, and that's the first recording of history that we have visually. Art has been there since then. Today, art is using technology to produce art, but the one thing that links it and remains constant is art as a creation of history. Art is also um, very, very important to our political statements. If you look at any of the art, whether it's the Renaissance, whether it's the French artists during the Revolution, the French Revolution, if you look at any aspect of art today and in the past, you will notice that politics is very much a part of what the artists are doing. So art is not something which is merely pretty. It's what is going on around us. It's a record of all that is happening in the world around us. So for me, art is so rich and so complex and so multi-layered. Initial impact of an artwork is far greater than perhaps just a beautiful building. A beautiful building will, of course, make an impact, but the building also has layers that will appeal to you. Um, it'll have the functionality, it'll have the comfort, it'll have magic within, magic without. There'll be these little, layers that you will peel off and discover. Similarly with the artwork, but the first impact, the first reaction that you see to an artwork is visceral, it's primal. It's generated by your heart, by your soul, by your eyes. It's not really only an intellectual thought. It's not about, oh, I'm thinking about so and so. I know what their work is all about. It could just be a young artist whose work you've never seen before, but it grabs you. If you've read Shakespeare, when you read Shakespeare at 17 and when you read Shakespeare at 25 and you go back and read Shakespeare at 40, it's the same play, it's the same sonnet, but it's a completely different meaning because that meaning is coming from within you and what is going on in your life, in your heart and in your mind, and where you've evolved in your life, what you have been through. For me, great artworks are that. You know, I remember seeing Damien Hirst's Pharmacy at the Tate the very first time. And I remember being enthralled, being completely awestruck by everything about it, from the scale to the details. How can somebody who does what I do not obsess over details? And then I went back to it 2 years later. And I remember because at that time, someone in my family wasn't well and there was an issue with medication and something else. And then what really struck me at that point was how he was making such a strong statement about the pharma industry at that point. And that is what I mean by a great, great artwork. The same artwork evoked two completely different emotions in me. So Virgil is a trained architect. As you know, he's a civil engineer and he's a trained architect. Interestingly, he's not practicing either of those yet, but who knows what he will do. I think to go back to Damien Hirst and Virgil, if you notice, they are both playing off dichotomies. They both play off these amazing paradoxes. So Virgil created a line of streetwear, right? Which is, what is the perception of streetwear? Cheap, inexpensive. And I remember reading this and being fascinated by him saying that I want to add an intellectual depth to streetwear. And I want to look at Duchamp and I want to say that I'm happy to cut and paste, but I want to take it to a thought out level, which then makes it nothing cheap. And look at that idea. I mean, I think that idea was remarkable. So whether it's a Virgil or a Damien, that first idea, the initial kickoff, that little burst of creativity is magical. And that, I think, is where they take it and they transcend it. So then Virgil takes the same idea and goes to IKEA and creates a line of furniture for millennials. Okay, so look at his target audience. He's got LV, the men's collection, and he's got the millennial audience for furniture. He's got streetwear for Off-White. But he's transcending them all with a uniform philosophy. He will stop editing at 3%, as he says. He will not edit beyond 3%. There's great clarity of vision. There is politics, that he showed with Murakami. He tied up with Jenny Holzer. Again, he brings his own self. So the intimacy of art that I was talking about, all of these great artists, whether it's Atul who brings his politics into his work, a Virgil who's bringing exactly what he believes in his philosophy, or a Damien Hirst, or a Banksy. What are they all bringing to the play? They're bringing an idea beautifully executed, which is unique, which is highly, highly intimate, which is personal, yet can resonate with millions across, regardless of geography, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of anything. And that is, I think, the beauty of these amazing people. Because of social media and the internet and instant access and visual and informational access to everything, can you imagine what the outreach of a Da Vinci would have been? So why would we not pick up anything which is mass-oriented today? Because everything is exponentially exploding in terms of numbers, right? The connectivity, the reach is immense, which is why I think the world is responding, the creative world, the art world is responding the way it is. Also, I think it's very important that the politics of art is not exclusionary. It never has been. And I think this is a statement that is being made by people like Virgil Abloh or Banksy or anyone. There's no exclusion anymore. And I think that's a wonderful worldview. I would like to thank the Kiranadar Museum of Art for giving us this amazing platform to discuss art, design, the confluence of all things wonderful. Thank you.